The number of projects under the Marvel Cinematic Universe umbrella keeps growing each year. Since Iron Man and its sequels that kicked off the MCU, certain villains are bound to show up only once or twice in the MCU. Obadiah Stane, the Ironmonger, was the first in a long list of great villains who were defeated by the end of the movie they appeared in, never to be seen again. This is a pattern that highly contrasts with the nature of storytelling in comic books, where villains are more likely to make a comeback than not. Aldrich Killian, the Mandarin, also had a good story in Iron Man 3, but he died at the end of his first and only appearance. He ended up being the best villain in the Iron Man franchise, but Justin Hammer, an Iron Man 2 villain, was treated much worse by the MCU. He was completely overshadowed by the presence of the other villain in the movie, Ivan Vanko, aka Whiplash. Of all Iron Man villains seen in the MCU, Justin Hammer is definitely one that we haven't seen enough of, as he has much more lore in comics. The rivalry between Hammer Industries and Stark Industries was never explored in depth. Justin Hammer is currently in custody at Seagate Penitentiary and could come back in theory, yet that's unlikely considering the MCU's track record. Beyond the Iron Man films, Sonny Burch is another great example of an underrated villain. Ant-Man and the Wasp had an interesting web of relations between all the characters, but Sonny Burch ended up overshadowed by Ava Starr, aka Ghost, and Darren Cross. Burch is the chairman of Cross Technologies, the weapons firm run by Darren Cross, also known as the supervillain Yellow Jacket in Ant-Man. Cross at least had the MODOK storyline and appeared twice. Sonny Burch wasn't as lucky, and some fans don't even remember him. Moving on to even more powerful villains who were underused, we have to mention Caecilius. The Doctor Strange antagonist was defeated and became part of the Dark Dimension for all eternity, so fans will probably never see him again. And all he can do. Caecilius has been around in Marvel Comics from 1964 until his death in the 2022 series, Death of Doctor Strange number 5, January 2022. But in the MCU, he's overshadowed by Baron Mordo. Killmonger is another character that fans would love to see come back in a future MCU project. He died way too soon, and though he was seen in the ancestral plane, we'd rather have him alive. But of all villains we've discussed so far, no one was more underused than Ultron. Although he's perceived as a more important villain than the other characters mentioned, there is still so many more stories to tell with Ultron that fans can't help but miss him in the MCU. In the comics, Ultron returned multiple times, each time more powerful than before. His ability to evolve and adapt is lost in the MCU, so his absence since Avengers, Age of Ultron, is definitely felt by fans. At least Ultron gets the respect he deserves as a great supervillain. Meanwhile, there's another character who is not even seen much as a villain anymore in the MCU, Baron Zemo. Many fans argue that the changes made from his comics counterpart to live action ruined the possibility of adapting many amazing storylines in which he's the big bad guy. Zemo's story was heavily altered to fit the narrative of the projects he appeared in, but stick around because we will discuss how he could actually still be developed in future MCU projects to become an important supervillain. Baron Zemo first appeared in the MCU in 2016 as a key part in the Sokovia Accords dispute in Captain America: Civil War. The story of that movie was a direct consequence of what had just happened in Avengers: Age of Ultron. The Avengers saved the world, but at the cost of completely ruining the capital of Sokovia. After the Battle of Sokovia destroyed his hometown and killed his family, Zemo became a criminal mastermind and sought revenge against the Avengers and other superheroes. He framed Bucky Barnes for the bombing the United Nations and killing T'Chaka, which directly influenced the Avengers to have a civil war. At the end of the movie, with his defeat and incarceration, it seemed like Zemo would too become a one-project villain. Thankfully, he re-emerged 8 years later in the 2021 Disney Plus limited series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. At the same time, the show turned Zemo into a character even more contrasting with his comic book counterpart. But by the end, he proved to remain a bad guy at heart. Bucky Barnes broke him out of prison so he could help him and Sam Wilson deal with the Flag Smashers. Zemo agreed, and not out of kindness or even coercion, but because his biggest priority remains to put an end to all super soldiers. Even though both John Walker and the Dora Milaje were after him, Zemo proved to be cunning enough to always stay one step ahead of them. He would probably have escaped prison forever if not for Bucky finding him and taking him back. In the end, he went back to the custody of the Dora Milaje Kalahe and to his life sentence at the prison for enhanced individuals called the Raft. Despite working alongside the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Zemo still proved to be a villain deep down by doubling down on his opinion that all super soldiers should be killed. Even in prison, he continued to be dangerous. Prior to his arrest, Zemo hired Esnik to set off his bomb on an armored truck carrying the remaining Flag Smashers. While in his cell at the Raft, Zemo heard the news of the bombing on the radio and knew his mission against the Flag Smashers was complete. It's fair to say he was not at all defeated in the series, although he ended up back behind bars. Well, time for the MCU to have him break out of prison again and show the world what a great supervillain Zemo can really be. Having him relatively come out on top in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier's finale puts him in a great position to make a comeback. But Zemo is not underrated just because he's underused, only appearing in 2 projects. He's underrated also because the vast majority of his rich backstory in Marvel Comics has never been used, and those who haven't read the comics won't know. Zemo in the MCU is a great character and deserves more recognition. Bringing him back in a future project and turning him more into someone like his comics counterpart would be really interesting. In fact, Baron Zemo is the name of 2 supervillains appearing in Marvel Comics, both Heinrich Zemo and his son Helmut Zemo. Helmut is the only Baron Zemo that made it to the MCU, but his father was arguably an even worse person. Heinrich Zemo was a Nazi scientist during World War II. He was the 12th Baron Zemo, a title of German nobility. During that time, he became an antagonist to Captain America. He was the inventor of Adhesive X, a chemical that could bond with anything, being practically undissolvable, which first appeared in Avengers Volume 1 number 6, May 1964. His early experiences with the substance is what caused his hood to be forever attached to his head. His son, Helmut Zemo, also fell into Adhesive X and had his face permanently disfigured in Captain America Volume 1 number 168, September 1973. After the end of World War II and the dissolution of the Nazi government, the Zemos fled to South America. In the modern era, he tried making a comeback and put together the Masters of Evil team, but he died fighting the Avengers, and his son carried on his legacy. Helmut Zemo is a much more layered character than his father. Having been around in Marvel Comics for a much longer period of time, he had more opportunities to impress readers with his schemes, tragic backstory, and indefensible worldviews. One thing that MCU Zemo has in common with the comics Zemo is that, much like Magneto or Thanos, he firmly believes he is on the right side. He sees the Avengers as the villains. Because of the death of his father, he sees all superheroes as dangerous, and instead of only orchestrating schemes from the shadows like he does in the MCU, Helmut Zemo is a much more active villain in the comics. Zemo also uses a hood to hide his disfigurement caused by Adhesive X. He took over the leadership of the Masters of Evil after his father, and even rose to the high ranks of Hydra. Unlike the MCU Zemo, he believes in the Nazi propaganda his father taught him. In parallel to erasing super soldiers from the world, he also has the goal of dominating the world and spreading Nazism. He eventually married a woman named Heike, who claimed to be a reincarnation of his father. They adopted 25 children with plans of brainwashing them to follow their political agenda and become an army. Steve Rogers later freed the children in Captain America number 434, October 1994. Another huge highlight in his comics trajectory is when Zemo took over the identity of the hero Citizen V and made the Masters of Evil pretend to be the Thunderbolts in Thunderbolts number 1 to number 12, 1997. His plan of infiltrating the superhero community to rule over the world almost worked, but his own team members began to like being heroes. Over time, characters like Songbird, Machev, and Atlas found redemption. This led to internal conflict and forced Zemo to change strategy. At first, he only pretended to adapt to the shift in the team, but soon became conflicted as well. He transitioned into an anti-hero for a while, remaining an ambiguous leader to the Thunderbolts. Zemo eventually fell back into villainy and clashed with heroes like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, the Falcon, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and even the Punisher. Baron Zemo allied himself with Mayor Wilson Fisk, as both wanted to kill Frank Castle and all other vigilantes. Zemo disguised himself as Citizen Vi again, reassembled the Thunderbolts, and Fisk put him in charge of dealing with his enemies in Punisher, Volume 12, Number 13, July 2019. This duality, where he oscillates between villainy and an apparent search for redemption, was partially explored by the MCU in his appearances so far. But this same aspect of the character can still be approached in a deeper and darker way.
Who are you? What do you want?
To see an empire fall.
If you have watched Thunderbolts and Daredevil Born Again, you may already be having some ideas as to how Zemo could fit back into the MCU now. Captain America, Civil War and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier have already laid down the groundwork to evolve Baron Zemo into a more comic-accurate character. His years in prison could have hardened him, making him into a much more extreme villain. To truly unlock Zemo's potential in the MCU, Marvel needs to let him embrace the complexity of his comic book counterpart, and there are many ways to do that. First of all, he needs to break out of the raft or be pardoned. One direction is to place Zemo in the new Avengers team after Bucky goes to him once again and has him released for cooperating in an important mission. Zemo would secretly fake a desire for redemption, pretending to be a real hero now that he's free. Behind the scenes, he would strike a deal with the Kingpin to use his influence to turn the Avengers against vigilantes. He would be an even more psychologically driven antagonist. He would influence the new Avengers subtly, sowing distrust among them, and making them believe vigilantes are villains. This would also be a compelling conflict for Bucky, who already has a complicated history with Zemo. Another possibility is Zemo breaking out of prison without any involvement from Bucky. Finally free, he could found the Masters of Evil and fully embrace a new extreme ideology he developed white in extreme isolation in the raft. A Masters of Evil movie or TV show could be really fun. In it, we would see villains like Abomination and Justin Hammer be recruited by Zemo and adopting fake hero identities. The team could pretend to be heroes and do evil hiding in plain sight.
My name is Zemo. I will repeat my question.
This route allows Marvel to expand Zemo's role without necessarily making him the next big bad, since that seems reserved for Doctor Doom. This same Masters of Evil team can be hired by Kingpin in Daredevil, Born Again's next season, or season 3 for example. They could come in as an emergency measure when the Punisher copycats can't finish the job, as a major antagonist to Captain America but underused in the Steve Rogers era in the MCU. Zemo could also re-emerge as a new villain to Sam Wilson. Zemo is a beloved Marvel villain who could also hold the spotlight on his own, a prequel limited series exploring his past, from his father's legacy to the fall of Sokovia, or his rise in the criminal underworld, would also allow for the MCU to explore more of Zemo without committing to keeping him in the franchise. Since Marvel Studios is looking to incorporate more genres and political intrigue into the MCU, with Zemo they have the chance to explore a darker territory. This prequel could be a political thriller showing how Helmet was brainwashed by his father and became one of the world's greatest manipulators. It could explore how his noble lineage was tied to Hydra, the early version of the Masters of Evil started by his father, and reveal that he actually began formulating his anti-superhero ideology long before the Avengers showed up in Sokovia. The MCU version has already proven himself capable of manipulating Earth's mightiest heroes into conflict, escaping justice, and even continuing a mission from behind bars. Whether as the architect behind a fake superhero team or someone infiltrating established teams, Zemo has the potential to become a bigger antagonist in the MCU's future. Instead of creating a new big bad from scratch, they already have one in Zemo. He already has a relationship with heroes, knows how to play people against each other, and remains firm in his extremist beliefs. As a manipulator yet diplomatic figure, he can be a bridge between others characters who deserve to come back, like Justin Hammer and Sonny Burch, who he could also help break out of prison. His worldview can justify a descent into madness, where Zemo can become an enemy to anyone who has any kind of enhancements, heroes, or villains. But if Marvel Studios doesn't want to bring Zemo back to stay, they could just acknowledge a darker version of him in the prequel we've suggested. At this point, Zemo could easily fit into a Captain America movie, or a new Avengers movie, or even a new season of Daredevil, Born Again. He could make alliances with Wilson Fisk, or maybe Bullseye instead, and be an antagonist to Matt Murdock moving forward.
Your end will be swift. Your end is now.
And there are so many other directions in which the MCU could take him, which is why we would like to hear your opinion on Baron Zemo. Would you like to see him back in the MCU? Maybe you don't agree with our pick of the MCU's most underrated villain. If not Zemo, who do you think is much more powerful and interesting than most fans believe? Should the MCU keep the villains around for more projects, like it happens with heroes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching CBR.